Hey guys, it's DDK here. Let's talk some sports psychology. Today we'll be talking about focus and mental resilience. Now, of course, focus and mental resilience are both very important things to your performance, and I think everybody's interested in their performance. So we'll be talking about some of the habits and practices to better enforce good focus, to define what it is as well, and also some methods to reset yourself mentally if your focus is shaken by any of the inevitable distractions, of which there are many when you're playing and trying to perform. Focus is so important to performance. And in this podcast, I hope that I can help to shed some light on what focus is and to help you also understand some tips to have a better approach when it comes to having better focus, because it is, again, so important in performance that I think it's of interest to everybody. And it's something that also impacts us in every part of our lives, as it's about our mental state. So firstly, I think, one of the big issues with focus is that it's quite an abstract term. It's very intangible. You can't really touch it. You can't reach out and point to it. It doesn't exist in that sense. It's in your mind, and it's your mind's ability to focus, to concentrate on a task, to understand within a task what are the most important points of this task. Where do I direct my mental energy on this task? That's effectively what focus really is. It's the center of any interest or activity you may have or maybe undergoing. And so from that perspective, it's one of those things where, for me, when I was a younger player, I recognized it to be one of the most difficult obstacles for myself. And I took so many different methods and approaches to try to rectify it. Because fortunately, one of the things that made me a very good player when I was younger is that I had some very good mentalities by default, good mindsets, such as, never set a limiting belief for yourself. If your goal is, if you really want to and identify with being a professional player, to be a champion, to be very, very good at something, any weakness that you have, it's just about finding the right approach to rectify it and to work on it in the right ways, and you can overcome it and then eventually reach that goal. So I never really looked at it like, I have this inherent issue and therefore I will never be good. And I think that is an issue that a lot of people do have, and everything comes down to approach. An obstacle is not a reason to say no. It's just a reason to be smart and look exactly at how you can potentially handle it, because you can't just barrel through every single task in life in a simple manner. Like, some things require a lot of thought, a lot of workarounds. Some things are a bit more straightforward and a bit more simple. And the things that are straightforward and simple are the things that come naturally to you, because those are your natural strengths. And the thing is, it's like, for example, if you look at a character that you'll build in an RPG, it might be like a warrior type. He's going to have high hit points, and he's going to have, this is very nerdy, by the way, high hit points, and he's going to be, have a lot of strength. He can carry a lot of like heavy armor and all this kind of stuff, but he's not going to be able to sneak around and steal stuff from people because he's wearing this big heavy armor. He's not going to be have much dexterity or finesse when it comes to, picking a lock or doing anything like that. So, there's everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. That's the overall point that I'm trying to make. And I really want to hammer it home that a weakness that you have is really an exciting opportunity to grow as a human being, because the ways in which you learn to deal with that particular weakness, that whole process is something that will bleed into everything else you do. As a quick aside here. So going back to me and my struggles with focus, I really couldn't understand the correct approach to begin with. This sounds ridiculous. One of my mentors at the time suggested, like, he noticed that focus was a big issue for me, and he suggested that I grind Sudokus. Now, I was very bad at Sudokus, so from that perspective, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this and get good at them and learn to solve them really, really quickly. And in many senses, the Sudoku was good and it was a good practice, but it wasn't quite for the same reasons as I would have liked it to be. It wasn't a good practice for me ultimately from a focus perspective, and we'll get into that in a moment. However, it was very good insofar as it really allowed me to sort of revel and explore something I was very bad at. And that's good. That's a good behavior to have, because it creates more resilience whenever you are up against a task which you're bad at. Because I think there is often the case that a lot of people will be up against an activity which they find out they're bad at, and they won't have this resilience. They won't have a reference point that, oh, I can just overcome this if I just work hard enough. And so what ends up happening instead is you can get an emotional response where it's like, shit, this is a reason why I suck, as opposed to this is a reason for growth, because you have to habituate, you have to cultivate that behavior to have a positive emotion instead of a negative one when you're facing challenge in that way, by just making yourself do it, and just having a history of taking up challenges which you're really bad at. Like, running was one for me. I realized that I was really bad at running. I was overweight, didn't really have quite the build for it. I didn't have the fitness for it. So what did I do? I just ran. I did a shit ton of running. I ran a lot. I can't really emphasize that enough, until eventually I was like, holy shit, I'm actually pretty darn good at running now. Obviously, I'm not going to be competing in the Olympics anytime soon, but it was a very positive experience. And also at the same time, stuff like that serves to do is break you out of any mental patterns that you may have, which can be really important, because one of the other issues is that we can often get locked into an identity that we set for ourselves, and that's often a problem, because that means that we become much more rigid, and in that rigidity it means that we're going to be less malleable, we're going to be sort of less open to things that can be good for us, because the way that you'll look at things is going to be a little bit more negative, as opposed to having cultivated this behavior that just any challenge can be good. And that's really where you want to be. Any challenge needs to be good. And for example, if you're in a situation where you're like, shit, I got to watch some demos, but I really don't think that's going to be fun, and this is going to suck. Well, what's happening here is that because this is going to be something, it's going to be very challenging, and you walk into the demo, and you're like, what the hell do I even look at? This feels like a waste of time because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Well, that's a big problem, because that is a massive incentive for you not to watch demos and not to learn the skills and to learn a new way of thinking to make it valuable. And so that's an approach thing as well. And I think that's really, where all of this comes down to. You have to have a good approach, because a good approach can make a very difficult task that's very overwhelming in all senses, and emotionally as well. It can really make it a lot easier to deal with, and you can go into it and you can come out actually not having wasted your time in doing something very hard, and learning from it adds massively. So did I get anything out of the Sudoku? That's probably what you're wondering at this point. When is this guy going to start talking about focus? As he promised. Well, so the thing about it was that it didn't really help me with focus, but it did help me in the ways I was just previously talking about, which is why I got into that. And so I had to instead, think more about this focus thing, and I had to think about flow state. What is flow state? Because I had experienced it so many times, and it's something that I wanted to replicate. And it dawned on me that flow state is basically an extreme focus. It's almost a trance-like experience, because everything around you slows down. Everything that's not the task that you're thinking about blurs away. Now that is a hyper level of focus. That is such a level of focus that everything that's not important blurs away. Now, one of the reasons why that happens for athletes, or for anyone that has spent thousands of hours playing a game, or anyone that's just very sure of themselves in many senses, it happens because you just know as to what the most important things are right now. Your brain knows exactly which bits of information and which patterns mean what, and you know exactly the process for how to deal with them. And also at the same time, what your brain is doing is it's also, focusing so much, it's trying to predict what's happening as well, because that's also a part of focus. Like, focus is often about prediction. Why prediction, you're probably thinking? I thought that it's about everything that I should be focused on right now. I'm thinking about this thing that's happening right now. Well, that's the thing really, is that everything that's happening right now, you're already reacting to it. So focus is about understanding, based on the information that you have, what are the most important things to look out for and to be ready for. And it's because, for example, there's this idea of priming yourself. What is crosshair placement about? Crosshair placement is about visualization. What is visualization about? It's about priming yourself. It's about readying yourself for something that could happen. And so it's not just looking at a corner as you move around. It's much more than that. The proper crosshair placement is very important from that perspective. And also, there's been many studies which will tell you that visualization improves your reaction times. And it's just because you're more ready. You've prepared yourself for an eventuality. And so this goes to one of my tips in how to increase your focus. It also is a way that you can perhaps skip some of the many hundreds of hours that some people need to go through to achieve the same result and achieve these flow states, seamlessly. And we'll talk also in a moment why it's difficult to hit flow states sometimes. So in this instance, we understand that focus is about knowing what's important in a situation. And it can be, for example, I'm waiting for this one flashbang or this one smoke grenade to come into my bomb site. And I know exactly, based on the position that I've taken, exactly how to respond. I know where my teammate is. I know the communication that I'm supposed to deliver. And I also know exactly what is most likely to happen from the perspective of what the opponents are most likely to do now, because I have more information, and my studying of demos and playing my position has shown me what are the most common tendencies from an opponent when this opening is used. You have a checklist. There's a complete checklist of the things that you need to think about and the things that you want to do. And this is a series of reference points for your mind to focus on. If you don't have that, then where does your mind go? Well, there's so much information, there's so many distractions that's happening constantly and consistently within a game of Counter-Strike. Things then become a bit confusing, which you definitely do not want, because as soon as things get confusing, there is no focus point. There's no way for you to anchor yourself into the situation. And then you have also nothing really to work off of from the perspective of prediction. So focus gets smashed by these situations where you don't know what to do. So you have to fix knowing what to do, and you have to fix that by understanding, setting yourself up for success by creating some protocols. And as I previously discussed, based on the studying that you may do, you may come upon certain protocols, or maybe you'll just copy them from players that you like and players that you study. Now, the other thing here as well is that in Counter-Strike, one of the reasons why hitting that flow state or that focus can be difficult is because you can't have a checklist for everything. So a way to mitigate that and deal with that is by just having a good understanding of the fundamentals. So understanding basically, what positioning can generally be good, or what to generally expect when certain things happen. And to understand that certain positions are strong, to understand that this is a round where maybe, let's say, that their economy sucks. So, okay, they've got really terrible guns, very likely. So that means that my positioning should be changed based on that fact. And that sort of pushes you into this sort of string of decision making that's further and further more refined, and it gives you more of a basis for understanding the round and what to do. And so from a focus perspective, you have all these anchor points now of focus, as opposed to just being out there in this wilderness where you're looking around and you've got no idea what's actually important. You don't know where to place that mental energy to focus. Pretty much anything in life that happens, there is a huge amount of information that is flying towards you. And human beings, how do human beings work? Human beings generally work based on value systems. You will be receptive and you'll see things that you think are valuable to you. And I've mentioned this little test before, but if you were to look at a painting on a wall and I said, okay, I want you to look at this painting for 30 seconds. And then after the 30 seconds, I want you to turn to me and tell me everything that was red. And then I ask you afterwards, okay, what was blue in the painting? You'll probably struggle, because the value system that I set for you in that task was very specific. It was to find things that are red. So you're going to be focusing on looking for the information that you think is important at that time. So your ability to take in the information and to understand the information that is not that focus is going to be very difficult, if not completely impossible in some cases. So this is a very small example of something that's happening in a much greater scale when you play a game like Counter-Strike or when you play anything. And extreme focus to the degree where you achieve flow state is about having, and let's say, we're talking about someone that just has it, they can't explain it. But this is generally going to be a person that's put thousands of hours into the game. And it's because you've taught your brain what I call sort of learned intuition, where so much in the way of patterns that your brain picks up on determine insights from all of these patterns. And so then your brain automatically knows what's important. So what happens then is that all of the noise, all of the distraction within the game just goes away. And so when that happens, just have this very smooth experience within the game, because there's much less effort that's required. There's much less conscious thought. And this is a very interesting mind state and a very important one to get into. And it happens when you've effectively removed all the noise from the game. You understand what all the data means and how your responses to it should be. You've created effectively what is a model to understand the game. And this understanding means that you have to do very little work in actually thinking about it, because effectively it's like 2 + 2 = 4. Now, you could do the mathematics, the mental arithmetic, and work out that 2 + 2 = 4. But when I'm stating this now and you're listening to it, you could tell me that without thinking about it, because you just know the answer already and it's memorized in your brain. You just inherently understand this fact. And so when you get into a situation in the game where you have this model, we've created a situation where you have this easy access to that subconscious. So instead of having to actually consciously do the work and do the thinking, like your brain knows what's important, is focused on it, and it just does it. Much like 2 + 2, it just = 4. You don't even have to think about it. And that's really where you want to be. So I find these practices are very helpful to allow myself to more frequently enter into this flow state, this more subconscious state where I'm just acting and reacting as opposed to thinking. Because I feel as though if you are consciously thinking a lot, that blocks your access to the subconscious, because they're just two completely different frames of mind. Because the conscious is focused on many things. Like, you're trying to think about all kinds of different situations. You're trying to question all kinds of different things. It's not as though you just know the answer already, which is what we talked about previously. Now, this is very important to make this distinction, because when you're practicing, you want to be thinking consciously much more often, because you want to create a situation where you're getting a better understanding for the game, and you're creating a better model to have decision making come from. Whereas when you're in the official match, you want to just act. That's why, you'll hear from like every single different sport, from various different coaches and athletes, and just everyone will say that, practice and the official are completely different. Hence the quote, and there are many like this: tomorrow's victory is today's practice. We have to make that distinction. You have to always understand, what you're trying to do. Like, what is the goal and what is the most effective way to reach that goal? And in practice, sometimes the most effective goal is not to have the best performance, but it's to have the best data to inform your performance later on. The mental effort and putting the time into, let's say, studying demos in this case, to be able to create that mental checklist, what you're doing is you're accelerating the process of training your intuition and training your ability to have insights. And then once that becomes routine, it understands the most likely outcomes without you having to think about it. And when you get to that stage, that's when you're really hitting that flow state. Now, there's a lot more, obviously, that can really go into focus, because one of the issues with focus as well is the distractions that happen to us on a daily basis. And the distractions can be so much and so varied. And so, for example, if you're a player playing on stage, it can be the crowd. We can put this in an umbrella term, which is pressure, for example. That's, pressure is a very specific type of distraction, and pressure is really all about a distinct sort of emotional response that you might have to a environmental situation. But it can be that you're distracted in other ways because, let's say, something within the game doesn't go to your expectation. Or perhaps it's because you have some reference points recently that make you less able to have good positive thoughts. One of the things that, for example, can be an issue with people losing focus is that a lot of people, the way that they try to achieve a flow state, or they try to get into the zone, is by building positive narratives as to, let's say, I'm the best. I've had all these great practice games. This is a part of my narrative. This means I'm good right now. I had all these games where I played really well. But what happens is that's actually quite flimsy. That's a pretty flimsy method to try to focus yourself, because you become susceptible to things happening which go against that narrative, and it can pretty much smash the narrative. We've probably all felt this, that we're, having a really, really good, week maybe even, and then you have a game where everything is just going wrong, and it has a horrible effect, because it really crushes you you out of that narrative that you built for yourself, because it's happening objectively. How can you rationalize or create a fantasy that distracts you from what's actually happening, which is you getting completely crushed in this situation, you being unable to hit your shots, or you being unable to win that match for whatever reason. So a good method there is that you set a different criteria for your success, and you try to instead focus on your mental checklist, and you try to understand, what is my goal right now? And you start to practice a more mindful kind of practice where you sort of take a moment, you sort of take a deep breath. And, this is very much the meditation type stuff that we're talking about here, mindfulness. Because what mindfulness helps you to do is it helps you to not even need a narrative. It helps you to just reset yourself. And that's very important. This is something that a lot of the professional players will be learning, is ways to reset their focus. And a reset of focus is by sort of allowing everything to just happen and to just pass you by, and not latching onto any of these negative thoughts that are happening, but just let them pass by. Because you can't really stop. You can't become a Zen master where you don't experience negative emotions or thoughts. That's not really an option. But what you can do is you can get better and better at just letting them go, and then understanding how to refocus yourself back onto the task. Now, if we look at the practice that I was suggesting earlier, where we have all these reference points created, and we have all of these practices that we go through, these mental checklists and so on. Now, all of a sudden, you take a deep breath, you ground yourself, you think, you don't think about the score. The score's completely unimportant to right now. Like, what is important to right now? Well, right now is about what you can do, what your next decision is. And so you judge yourself on the quality of these decisions. And because you've put so much work into creating these decisions, that allows you to more effectively go and execute them without having a distraction to your focus. And you can quickly refocus, and you can quickly not feel as bad. Maybe you feel a little bit bad, but you can quickly get rid of that, and you can just do your job. And so this is really important, because we cannot be perfect with focus. We can develop tools to allow us to think in better ways, to be better prepared, to be able to focus more and better, and to have more effective practice as well. But there's going to be times when you just lose focus, and it's all about having good tools to regain that focus. And I think mindfulness is a really important one. So if you want to think more about mindfulness, you can go and check out Headspace, which is a meditation app. It's very good. And, a lot of people think that this stuff's very woo, but in reality, it's just about practicing having, more mental control, basically. Because, for example, we learn to have better mental control as we grow up. We get better at managing our emotions, for example. That's really no different than getting better at managing our mental space, which is what the idea of mindfulness really is about. It's not about not thinking and becoming empty of thought. It's actually about the process of just letting thoughts pass without being attached to them. And that has a pretty profound effect. I think actually there's been some studies on, like, it actually drops your cortisol levels and so on and so forth, but that's besides the point. It is very good to create those reference points, and it's something where you don't have to sit there for 20 minutes every day. You can easily, have like a 3-minute meditation session where you just sit down and you just practice that mindfulness. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you have any questions about this topic, and I'm sure there are many questions, it is a complicated one, then please feel free to reach out to me at DDK Esports. If I get a bunch of questions, I might just record another podcast AMA style as a follow-up to this one. And if you'd like to support the podcast, then there's 2 ways you can do that. I have a Patreon, which is /DDK Esports. And otherwise, though, the best thing that you guys could do is just spread it around. If you think that you have friends that may be interested in some of the topics, then please feel free to share it with them so that we can grow the community and grow the listener base. That means that I will keep pumping these out. As always, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.